Hello and welcome to The Print and Snehesh expel. Now, over the last few weeks, India and Canada are in midst of a diplomatic storm. Now, a lot has happened on this front. It all started with the Canada accusing India of killing one of the terrorists who happens to be a Canadian citizen and expelling an Indian diplomat posted there. India retaliated by expelling an Canadian diplomat. Then India went ahead and shut down the visa services. And since then, a lot has happened. And I have with me a very interesting guest to talk to us about what this really means and what is it that Canada or India could have done different. I have with me Ward Elcock. He's the former director of the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, and he has also been the former defense minister of the country, that is of Canada. So welcome to the print, sir.
Pleasure.
So to begin with, now you've headed the Canadian intelligence for long. What is your view on what is happening right now between India and Canada?
It's an unfortunate situation. Having said that, it would appear that the government believes it has sufficient credible information to conclude that India was responsible for the assassination of a Canadian citizen.
So to begin with, you mentioned that has credible information. Both the Canadian Prime Minister, that is Justin Trudeau, as well as the Canadian Foreign Minister has spoken on this. The word that they have used is credible allegations. The word evidence is still missing in their pad list on what they have spoken. And I'll also quote the Canadian Defense Minister when she announced the expulsion of the Indian diplomat. She said, if proven true, this would be a great violation of the Canadian sovereignty. Now, the question is, if proven true. So what made the Canadian government, and that is a minority government, which is actually dependent on the support of a party which is headed by a Sikh. So what made the Canadian government go ahead and expel an Indian diplomat when they're yet to have a credible evidence? What they have say is credible allegation and if proven true.
Well, intelligence is rarely, if ever, evidence of anything. It allows you to come to conclusions about things depending on the strength of the intelligence. In this case, the government clearly has concluded that it had strong enough intelligence to conclude, and that means it's got multiple sources of intelligence that give it the information that India played some role in the assassination of a Canadian citizen. Now, to prove that in a court of law is a very different thing, and the reality is intelligence is rarely adduced in court hearings. It's often difficult to take intelligence into courts, particularly in this country, but I'm sure in other places as well. So the reality is that probably means that there need to be discussions between Canada and India rather than some court case to decide whether the information is credible or not.
Absolutely, that is true. I completely agree with you on the fact that there needs to be discussion between the two sides. And hence I was wondering what made Canada expel an Indian diplomat based on an intelligence which, as you say, it may or may not be confirmed at a later stage, credible intelligence as of now. So one interesting thing is that you've been, the Canadian intelligence chief. When the government, expelled the Indian diplomat, you had the Canadian media immediately reporting the name of the station head of the Indian intelligence in Canada. And they said that this was confirmed by the office of the foreign minister. Isn't it something which is strange? Is in the world of intelligence, you usually don't out the name. For example, when the Indian side expelled the Canadian the station chief, India never named the person's name. Isn't that do you think that was the right thing to do, putting the life of the officer in jeopardy?
I'm not sure that it put the life of the officer in jeopardy, but that's a pretty, it seems to me, a bit of a stretch. It is a little unusual.
Well, of course, because
I'm not sure why they did it.
Hmm.
But having said that, in cases when we've expelled Russian diplomats in the past, it's been made pretty clear that those individuals were intelligence officers as well. So it's not all that unusual.
Okay, so you're saying it's not unusual that the name has been outed. I'll tell you why there's a threat to his life. Why his life is in jeopardy? Because these are the same Khalistanis who killed a former prime minister, bombed an airplane in which you had over 260 individuals, including 230 odd Canadians who lost their lives. So, going ahead, what do you think is the way ahead as far as this is concerned? How do you see this investigation going on, or this chain of events turning out to be so?
Well, it's pretty hard to see if you're thinking of the investigation of the murder of the Canadian citizen. It's pretty hard to see that making any progress if indeed it was an assassination with the association of the Indian government. It's pretty hard to see that will ever come to a conclusion. So really the only way for movement to go ahead is for the governments to talk to each other. And at this juncture, I don't really see that in the near future.
Okay. And so, as we speak today, the Washington Post had come out with a story. They have been able to access the video footage of the attack. And now what the what the Washington Post reported is very interesting. It says that Niger was coming out. He was driving in his car. There was a car which came, blocked him. Two guys who appeared to be Sikhs, they came out. They opened fire, and they fired about 50 rounds, 34 of which hit Niger and killed him on the spot. And then they escaped. So they're saying there were 6 individuals, 2 cars, and he was shot at in a very gangster style shooting. In your experience, do you think, would it be an assassination, or would it be? Is it a possibility that this could actually very well be a gang war that is there? Because there are a number of Indian gangsters who are now in Canada, Canadian citizens still operating in India, who are not Khalistanis but gangsters. Could it be a possibility that this could also be a gang-related violence?
It appears that the government has information to the contrary. And frankly, I'm not sure there's much difference between gangland assassinations and assassinations carried out by governments, frankly. Okay.
So, since you mentioned that the government is quite sure that this was an assassination attempt, when I look at it, but there's no one who's been identified so far. The shooters remain unidentified. If there is intelligence to prove that this was indeed a hit that was authorized by the so-called agency, wouldn't the Canadians be able to put out the names of those shooters, identify those shooters? Because the WAPO says there were 6 of them.
Not necessarily, but you're talking about 2 different things. I suspect the information they have is conversations or communications that have allowed them to identify Indian support for the operation, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're able to identify the perpetrators themselves.
So in your sense, let's leave this whole incident, just keep it aside for some time, but in your own assessment as the former head of the Canadian intelligence, and as the fact that you were also the Deputy Defense Minister, do you feel that this trend of Khalistanis in Canada is something which should worry Canada?
The reality is that we have had in the past, as you mentioned earlier, there have been people whose activities rose to the level of terrorism in the Sikh community in Canada, Air India, and a couple of other incidents in Canada. Having said that, there haven't been any incidents in recent years, so far as I know. And at this juncture, I'm not aware of information that there are people in the community in Canada who are carrying out terrorist activities. There have been allegations, I understand, by Indian agencies that there are, but the Canadian Minister of Public Safety, when he commented on that information from India, my recollection of his comment was that that information didn't rise to the level of proof of any terrorist activities.
Okay, so the fact is that since since August 2021 and September 2023, the National Investigation Agency, which is India's investigation agency, their records show that they have approached the Canadian authorities 8 times seeking information regarding certain individuals who are wanted by India who are residing in Canada, and we are also told that till date 26 extradition requests have been sent to Canada, but somehow none of it really moves ahead. Is it normal for this thing to happen? Is it normal for the relations to come down to this point that you have extremist groups openly calling for the assassination of Indian diplomats, the High Commissioner and the Consul General posted there? They have the posters which had come out. The Canadians took down those posts. The Khalistanis took down these posters after Canada asked them to do. But such posters coming out, isn't it some of a matter of concern?
At the end of the day, as I've said on a couple of other occasions, support for separation is not a criminal offense in this country. Putting up posters is not a criminal offense in this country. Perhaps they are in India, and perhaps that has something to do with the definition of what Indian agencies see as criminal activity or terrorist activity. But so far as I'm aware, information provided by the Indian government so far, or Indian agencies so far, in the view of Canadian agencies, does not rise to the level of proof of a criminal activity.
Oh, so you're saying if there are posters which call for the assassination of Indian diplomats in Canada, that should not be a concern, that is not a crime in Canada?
Well, it's not necessarily a crime to put it up. Having said that, if there were information that organizations were seeking to actually carry out such activities and were attempting to assassinate people in India, then obviously that would be something that in the past we have investigated and prosecuted with respect to a number of countries. So Canada has no interest in supporting terrorist activities. I can only assume, given that they have not moved to prosecute anybody in recent years and have not apparently prosecuted anybody on the basis of accusations by Indian agencies, that they have concluded that that information is insufficient to justify a criminal accusation or criminal prosecution. And even if it were the case that they were carrying out such activities, I don't think that has really much relevance to the issue of whether or not Indian agencies were responsible for the killing of a Canadian citizen. That would be just simply distraction.
Well, that would be simply distraction, or could it also be the possibility that many in India believe that this was actually a distraction as far as the Canadian Prime Minister is concerned? Because as I said earlier, there is no talk of any evidence per se, no names of accused, no photos of accused. Everything that has been said so far is credible allegations, but no credible evidence per se, even if it's intelligence. But so, do you think this will have an impact on the overall, multilateral ties that India and Canada both have, especially when it comes to Indo-Pacific? Is this something that would have been taken into account by Canada?
I'm sure they have taken it into account. Clearly, it will have an impact on relationships with India and going forward. So that's unfortunate. But if countries take actions, I guess there are consequences.
Absolutely. As countries take action, there are consequences, you rightly mentioned. So one last question. Did you as a former intelligence guy who studied India, and who would have been a key part, the Indo-Canada relation would have been a key part of your focus area. Did you expect India to ramp up the response so hard in the way that it, of course, in Canada went in and expelled an Indian diplomat? Everybody expected India to, retaliate, tit for tat, move. It happened. But then India to go ahead and really close off the, first close off the visa section, visa issuance, and then issue a travel advisory against Indians, who want to travel to Canada, or Indian students who are staying in Canada. Is this something that was expected?
If it is something that should have been expected, if given the likelihood that it would happen. I'm not particularly surprised that it happened. Clearly, India is very upset, but to be frank, Canada is also extremely upset. Having another democratic country carry out an assassination in your country is hardly an acceptable activity.
Absolutely, with all the evidence, if there is evidence as such. But one last question. I'm so sorry. I know you have to go for
That's fine.
Just one last question. How much do you think is Trudeau under pressure domestically when it comes to this particular issue? Now, for example, when he was at the G20, his G20 visit didn't go really that well. But in the past also, there have been diplomatic gaffes that have taken place. How much do you think Trudeau is under pressure? Is there any kind of fact that Trudeau is dependent on a particular political party which has a huge support base in the Sikh community among the separatists, that is forced to act on, and so-called intelligence which may point to something which may or may not be actually true, that he did this because of he was under pressure politically?
No, I don't think that's true at all. And the idea that the New Democratic Party is somehow heavily supported by Sikhs is, I think, somewhat improbable. It may be led by a Sikh, but I suspect there are not a whole lot of Sikhs who support the New Democratic Party. There may be some, but I would be surprised to discover there are many. So I don't think that the support from the New Democratic Party says anything about support from the Sikh community.
Oh, fair enough. Thank you so much for speaking to the print. And